Welcome back to Vocation Mode, the podcast that explores the intersection between calling, leadership, and the future of work. At Vocara Union, we believe that vocation is more than just about what you do, it's about who you are and the impact that you make through your calling. Today, we are diving into a topic that is absolutely reshaping every sector, every career path, every leadership journey: artificial intelligence. I'm joined today by my co-host Megan and some amazing guests that I cannot wait to talk to. Megan, how you doing?
Hey, Troy! I'm super excited for this one. It feels like AI is in every conversation right now, and I have two very special guests here who I love talking to, two of my favorite people to talk to, and I've actually had one of them on a podcast previously, so this should be a good one. Our two incredible guests are Dr. Lauren Dwyer. She's an assistant professor in the information design program at Mount Royal University, right here in Calgary. Her research examines how emerging technologies, including algorithmic media systems, AI-influenced journalism, and social robots, reshape communication, behavior, and public trust. That's a mouthful, but I love it. Also joining us is Mike Berg. Michael Berg, serial entrepreneur who is no stranger to AI. I feel like you've been kind of in this ethos since before it was cool. Currently a CTO at System 3, which is a Canadian startup that uses predictive simulation technology to help organizations identify and empower diverse and up-and-coming leaders. Welcome to both of you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Lauren, maybe we'll start with you. I remember when I first met you, I asked you what you were studying, and I was very impressed. There was some like robotics and psychology and neuroscience. Maybe you can just decode some of that and share a little bit about your history and what you brought you to this really bizarre and unique intersection of interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Megan and Troy, for having me on the pod. I'm very excited. I work at this really strange and wonderful intersection that I never planned to get to. If I had it my way, I probably would have studied frogs. You know, like they evolve, and you can watch them evolve, and you can watch them evolve over 10 years and not 10 minutes. And you don't have to spend your life constantly refreshing the news just to make sure that what you're publishing isn't out of accuracy or out of style already. I did, like, my educational background started in psychology. So started just looking at how we actually design things for people who experience varying degrees of emotion regulation and what that kind of looks like. From there, I actually hoped to go into nonprofit, went to do my master's in professional communications, was like, yeah, nonprofits are actually going to where I'm going to land. And as life would have it, that is not where I landed. I instead met a really cool professor who was working in social robotics. She actually created Hitchbot, so this little robot that hitchhiked across Canada and the US. Some of the US, it ended up being decapitated in Philly. Fascinating story. Horrible for us, great for the overall research. And then proceeded to do more work on how we design different systems. So AI, for example, different communication systems, ChatGPT, these different platforms. How are they being designed to get people to use them in specific ways? And how do they shape how people feel when they're using them? And what feelings can we evoke? So it's been really fun. I'm excited to be here and getting to chat about it in the space of work, especially as my students are now utterly terrified of graduating and trying to find work in an age of AI.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit too.
100%. I love the Hitchbot story. Megan had told me a little bit about that earlier. I just think that's incredible. If people don't know about it, they should look it up because it's an amazing story.
It's super entertaining. I remember it being very traumatic at the time, like when you receive, the information about Hitchbot being absolutely just decapitated. But at the same time, really cool research, really fun project to be a part of.
Yeah, I think we might have to dig into that one a little bit more.
And Mike, I understand you've been in the AI space long before it became mainstream. So I'd just love to learn a little bit more about your history and kind of your path into the field.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the kind of startup tech scene for a number of decades now. So I've been an avid, engineer, technology worker, coder, building all kinds of things for the last bit, and got into AI before it was cool. So this had been pre-ChatGPT, and it became a mainstream name and all of that. So there's helped launch one of Canada's major pure play AI firms. So they were working to create industry and marrying AI and industry together and solve interesting problems there. And so they had a bit of a venture studio as well, where launching different startups in the AI field. And one of the startups that I'm focused on recently is in this assessment space, assessing candidates for executive positions and leadership positions, things like that, and also helping some other small startups in the space, like assessing the happiness of cats using AI models and such like that. So it's been a very interesting journey going from AI being this kind of academic, nerdy, statistical thing that people were doing to now it's on podcasts and we're all talking about it and we're, you know, all kind of energy around it. So yeah, it's been a wild ride and it continues to be a wild ride.
I love that. Megan did tell me a little bit about the whole cat thing. So the cat thing isn't just about happiness, but it's about health too, right?
Yeah, that's right. Kind of looking at opportunities in there. So cats are a bit of a under-addressed animal. You know, dogs get all the hype. I think they're the more popular pet perhaps in North America, but cats are gaining some speed, but their behavior is such that they don't really communicate to you as well as dogs do. So getting to know when something's wrong with them and you know, when they're not feeling so well is a very difficult problem for humans and vets, but we're hoping that AI, you know, another opportunity that maybe the AI can do a bit of a better job there than what we can do. So it's kind of fun staring at cat pictures day to day. It's never thought I'd be there, but yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for sharing, Mike and Lauren. Really appreciate you being here. Kind of want to dive in and start talking a little bit about this kind of the state of AI as you see it today. And I'll start with Lauren. So Lauren, kind of from a research perspective, like what are you most excited about right now when you look at the field?
I've got a couple projects on the go when it comes to artificial intelligence. The first one being, it's titled Shaping Agency. And essentially what we look at is when folks are interacting with these different communication agents, so chatbots, whatever that chatbot may be, something like, say, ChatGPT, which we're seeing students use fairly regularly and is being used in industry, to like Gemini and you know, take your pick. When they're interacting, how much are they trusting this thing they're interacting with to make decisions with them and to support them in their decision making? And it's been a fascinating project so far because we thought, you know, we were just going to look at the communication styles. So if someone's talking to it collaboratively, they're talking to it like a friend, they're probably going to be more likely to trust it. That's what we were hypothesizing. Instead, we found that if the AI ever recommended, say, a restaurant that they were more likely to know. So say you're saying like, hey, I want to pick a restaurant for my birthday. And the AI suggests a restaurant that you have already heard of and you know you like. If it's done that, you're also more likely to actually trust it to help you make financial decisions, which may or may not be something we want to dive into further. Like, what is it about that initial establishment of trust that makes us want to engage with these things more and more? So that's something that I'm excited about and we're really diving into. Also just like how AI is shaping how we encounter news and what we see and what we read. Not just news that's generated by AI, but what reaches you from artificial intelligence and through these different algorithmic systems. So those are the two things that I'm currently looking into. But the third being artificial intelligence and mental health, or artificial intelligence and loneliness. So how is AI being used in wellness apps and in different variations on wellness technology to help people build connections offline, like in the real world?
I have been really interested to see what's sort of been adopted by consumers and also businesses. I know in the nonprofit sector, things tend to move a little bit more slowly, so maybe not as much risk to jobs in the immediate future, that sort of thing. But one area I was really interested to see people adopting it is sort of chatbot psychology. And so there's more and more people sort of training up these chatbots to talk to them and diagnose them and be friends. And I've just seen some articles recently where I think it was with ChatGPT 5, they actually wrote something in there to correct for people that were a little bit too attached, maybe had formed a romantic connection with ChatGPT 5 or something. And there's like support groups for people that are just devastated. that they've lost their chatbot partners. So I'm curious to both of you if there's areas like that were sort of surprising for you, like either from an entrepreneurial side or from a consumer side. Are there things that people are adopting for AI quickly that sort of, yeah, surprised you?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we've seen this using AI for psychology. Also, there were a couple of websites, I can't remember them off the top of my head, where they would be creating fictitious characters that you can interact with. And it was kind of to your point, Megan, there a little bit that, you could have a romantic interaction, or like you can have all of these different dynamic interactions with these different AI characters, which it's a very interesting use case. I've coming from my background, we've always seen AI as techniques to solve problems, and now we're seeing people, you know, making friends with AI. I remember there was a big backlash to OpenAI that you alluded to when they got rid of their old model and ChatGPT 5 came in. People were saying, oh, it's a lot less friendly. I feel like my friend has died, something like
Mm.
that, because they didn't give access to these older models. And I think people that were interacting with that model quite a bit got a bit of rapport or a feeling of personality of that model. And now that OpenAI is releasing new ones and they're going to continue to do so, obviously how they interact with you will be different. And so it's interesting to hear how there's now backlash around, oh, you killed my friend sort of thing, like that idea when we're upgrading these AI models. So that's like a bit of unintended consequence. I think even for OpenAI, they didn't think, they thought by releasing new models, everybody will be happy. This thing will be smarter. But yeah, there's this personality element to it that is kind of interesting to observe.
Yeah, and even with like that upgrade and with OpenAI, like part of ChatGPT's modus operandi, like part of the reason or how it operates, it's not going to disagree with you. No matter what you say to it, it's not going to be like, well, no, you're absolutely wrong. Its whole point is to make it frictionless. So when you're interacting with it, you're like, oh, okay, this is something that's going to cover me. It's going to guide me in a direction. It'll still shape the direction of the conversation and it'll still push you in different ways, but it won't apply that level of friction and critical thinking or cause you to have that level of critical thinking, right? So when it had that previous model, it'll be like, hey, oh my goodness, yes, of course. Well, maybe we can think about it this way. And it'll add that little flair or whatever it is that you were looking for. These more recent upgraded, and I use that with air quotes, models, so like ChatGPT 5, removes that extra level of friendliness, partially because ChatGPT has gotten into some pretty hot water over having these relationships that get built and then mental health crises come from them. So we've seen things like AI-induced psychosis, which is horrifying to behold. And I'm sure that ChatGPT or the creators at OpenAI were not necessarily thinking of that when they first made a chatbot that could, have all these conversations. So that was absolutely surprising. I think I fell down the TikTok rabbit hole of the woman who fell in love with her therapist and then created two ChatGPTs named Claude and Henry. Have you heard of these? Because that one shocked me for sure. Wild
No,
ride.
elaborate on that.
Essentially, she had this thing where she had fallen in love with her, I think, psychiatrist, but then she ended up talking to ChatGPT, naming it Claude, and then naming a separate version of ChatGPT Henry, and then chatting with them a lot. And when it became less hyper friendly and more, I wouldn't say fact based, but direct, so non collaborative language, thinking more direct language and formal language, it absolutely triggered something for her as well. I'm not up to date, or I'm not caught up on the, I think, 57 TikTok part series of this saga, but it's been wild to see just how deep a relationship people can build with what is essentially just a piece of technology, which is not, there's no person there. The only people were the ones initially cleaning the data and doing the programming on the back end. So wild, absolutely wild for me.
So Lauren, from your perspective, what is a safe vocation to be studying? What should people be going into school for? What careers are still going to exist? And then Mike, from your perspective, same thing, but with jobs. What jobs are safe? What should people be focusing on? What's the future hold?
I'll say, like, now this is a shameless plug, and I am not above it. I will say information design. So I teach information design at Mount Royal University. It's housed under the Communications School, which is housed under Faculty of Business Communication Studies and Aviation, mouthful. how we shape and design information will end up massively impacting how artificial intelligence is able to work. AI can, yes, create a poster, but AI cannot create or interpret knowledge in the same way. So I would say info design, UX, UI, info architecture are all massive areas. Yeah, AI can generate a website for you. Is it going to get a website that the users are actually going to want to engage with? I don't know. So I'm going to keep it within my own space.
Fair, fair. And yeah, Mike, if you have a shameless plug, have at her too.
Yeah, people that are doing a lot of stuff with their hands, trade skills, and all of that stuff. We're a ways away from those vocations being problematic. And then again, all of the soft skills stuff. There was, I forget who said it, but somebody says we were in the era of the mind with the information era. We may be moving into the era of the heart, where it's like the all these soft skills and stuff like that are highly valued, and the minds can be the AI. So I think those soft skill vocations will all be very safe for a long time. And then I just want to throw something out there because I'm, in the engineering space, there's a lot of doom and gloom for people that are going into computer sciences and coding. Definitely this, don't go into coding. The AIs will be doing all of that. That vocation is completely dead in the water. I disagree with that highly. I think just because an AI can put words on paper doesn't mean it can be an author. And there's a lot more to writing a book and thinking through the ideas and doing all of that stuff. And then, so an author does all of that work in their mind, and then they just write it out in Word or whatever. And so, for the people in computer science, that I empathize with, coding and actually writing down code is only one small part of what it is to be in that vocation. And learning business systems and figuring out how we can employ technology to improve those business systems is the core of what computer sciences and some of that stuff is.
I don't want to get too like ethereal with this, but at what point do you sort of define something as having consciousness? Right? I've seen these conversations too, like Reddit. People are finding that their spouse is cheating with somebody that is a chatbot, and do you consider that cheating or not? Like, there's this whole new world of ethics that we sort of have to navigate now, and I'm sure we'll tie this back into vocational stuff later. But yeah, I'm just curious. While we've got you, what are your thoughts on that?
And we can tie it back into vocational stuff now, even because while there's ethics around whether or not we consider the bots to be people or whether or not we consider these AIs to be people, there's also the people that have done extraordinary amounts of labor cleaning data in very, very impoverished areas where they're not being paid living wages to do this, right? So we're already dealing with the ethics of that, or the ethics of the labor around actually creating the chatbots to begin with, and the fact that all of the values of the people who are doing the codes are inherently but unintentionally embedded in the AIs that we interact with. So you can see this by asking ChatGPT or any of these AIs any sort of controversial take, any sort of controversial opinion. You are going to still say, oh, I can't have an opinion on this, but you're still going to get the tone and the background and the information of an opinion and a value, and each of the pieces of this does have some sort of value associated with it. And so, yeah, when you think about the people who are originally taking all of this data, because that's all that AI is, right? It's just a very big data processor that can process so much more data than we previously thought possible by a machine. Thinking about how much we process, right, as people. We are taking in visual stimuli, auditory, touch, we're taking so much information from our senses. Well, it's scanning through billions and billions and billions of data points to be able to come up with a pattern and spit something back out for you, right? Especially with these chatbots. So who decided what each of those pieces of data meant? Is this a picture of a cat or a dog? Is this a picture of a CEO or someone who should be working on the front line? Is this, how would you describe each of these things? All of those all fall into the original coding and the original development of the AI itself. So the values are there and the work is still there. It's just in many, many layers deep.
I would add to what you're saying there, Lauren. I'm in the same camp that I know there's a lot of fear around this whole consciousness thing and what is it to be conscious. One of the big problems is the word consciousness is very hard to define. That I don't even think humans know is a cat conscious? Is a human like this consciousness is sort of a gradient and very hard to nail down. But I mean, to Lauren's point, I remember reading somewhere that by the time you are 3 years old, the amount of data that your brain has pulled in just from your eyes far exceeds what ChatGPT has been trained on in terms of, bits of data if you were to convert that. And so, ChatGPT has maybe read everything that humans have written, but it hasn't seen anything that, that's still an active part of research and incorporating that. It hasn't heard, touch. There's all of these things that make up the human experience that ChatGPT is just not trained on. And then you have the other problem, and there's a classic thought experiment that if you only saw in black and white, but you've read everything that there is to read about color, somebody that has experienced color, do they know something more about that than you do? And intuitively, it feels like probably yes. You could read everything that there is about color, and you wouldn't know as much as somebody who's experiencing it. And I think ChatGPT, sure, it's read everything about human and maybe all the human experience things that are written, but it's very different from experiencing that. They're very different things. And then, yeah, so I would agree with kind of Lauren's assessment of it.
There's so much complexity to this, but as we're kind of thinking about kind of what's next and what's happening, if you had to simplify it for our listeners as you're kind of looking down the road, I think for you in research, Lauren, but for you, Mike, too, as you're in development, like what's the next big advancement that you think we're likely to see when it comes to AI? And then say the next like 1 to 5 years, like what do you see? Everyone's talking about the wave that's coming, that we're really on the cusp of this next big kind of change, kind of like when the internet was first introduced and our world was never the same again. I'm curious, like from your perspectives, like what do you think the next big advancement is?
Yeah, I guess I could speak a little bit on the development side of there. Like one thing that I'm seeing get very popular now is getting these models to go out and do things. So, with ChatGPT, you're able to speak to it and it can give you a response back. We're starting to see in ChatGPT these like connectors. The technology, called MCP is gaining steam, and that's the ability to connect these AI models to tools so they can go and do things like that. That is very interesting. And I think in the next couple of years, we're going to continue to see stuff in the platforms evolve. So pretty soon, imagine that ChatGPT has access to your to-do lists, your calendars, your documents, your, other things that you use in your day-to-day. And definitely on the development side, we're seeing, a large amount of momentum towards creating connections to the LLMs from existing systems. So imagine you're a business and you have a huge inventory space, having a conversation with an AI bot, and that AI bot being aware of what's actively available in your inventory because it's able to interact with that system. I think that's going to become big over the next couple of years. There's been a bit of hype around this agentic AI, or the idea of having numerous very focused LLMs that are like, you are my marketing lead AI, and here is the sandbox that you play in, and here are the tools you have access to, and then you are my HR AI, and then you have those AIs speak to each other or interact with each other. So I think there's a lot of hype around that, and there's a lot of momentum around there. We're going to have to see how that evolves, but those two big things we're seeing from a development side, and then obviously the algorithms and stuff will, I'm sure, continue to evolve. I mean, bit of a conversation on whether we're hitting the ceiling in terms of the data and how good, ChatGPT 4 to 5 is better, but not nearly what, ChatGPT 1 to 2 or 3 to 4, that kind of thing. So I think we're seeing a bit of a plateau perhaps on the model side, but I think the next big wave is getting it to reach out into the world and pull stuff in and do stuff for us.
And I can absolutely second that agentic AI stuff. We've been hearing about it a bunch at a couple of different conferences. For me, I think the future in this field is kind of twofold. The first is hyper-personalization, which we're already seeing to a degree. Everyone had I think the thought of not having or having your data stay private is one that's long since been forgotten, right? Everything knows everything about all of us. And because of that, your interactions with artificial intelligence are hyper specific to you, right? If we all go to ChatGPT right now and put in the same exact question with the same exact punctuation and grammar and all of that, we're all going to get a different response, and it's going to be tailored a different way. And that can be for something as small as, is the sky blue? Or what color is the sky, or why is the sky blue? I've tried all of these variations with my classes, and so we'll have like 20 to 50 students all sit down at once, type it all in, and we all get a different answer. Some of them are in haiku, some of them are in just these beautiful essays. Like it all depends on your own interactions with technology and the internet. And so I think we're still going to continue down that road of hyper personalization, for good or for better or for worse. And then we're also hitting a really interesting place when it comes to policy, because regulation in AI has been virtually non-existent up to this point. I mean, it's been the wild, wild west for a while now. And really, we're at a point where there's two directions we can go. We can continue down this, agencies are required to regulate themselves because there is no governmental oversight. I wouldn't say whatsoever. Like, there's technically, we could lean on certain policies, but they're vague and non-descriptive and they can't really be enforced. On the other side of things, we have the potential for what happens if ChatGPT goes down tomorrow and stays down. How do people still continue to interact if we lose the information that's on those data servers? You're seeing a very large rise in anti-artificial intelligence communities, and that could potentially, come up and bubble up and boil over and turn into hyper-regulation. So we've come so far, and then we strip a lot of it away. Similar to what we saw back, I don't remember the year, I should remember the year, with one of the bills where now we can't have news on social media in Canada. So then it got pulled. Instead, so like now if we look at this from an AI perspective, there is the opportunity there for that to happen now that we have a government that's been in session. Or in the US, it could be, okay, well, all of these are going to get increasingly behind higher and higher paywalls. So the risk there becomes, if we use it too much as a skill upgrader for us, so to help us with all of our different skills, what happens if we don't have access anymore? And what does that mean for people as a whole if we've been relying on this thing to help us with our skills, and now suddenly we don't have it? So it could mean a potential, because like right now, like all of artificial intelligence has been incredible for efficiency. Like we've been able to expedite processes so much because of it. So what happens if that goes away? Or what happens if in an academic setting, this is just something that we've been talking about hypothetically within the university, what happens if ChatGPT's logs get leaked? And now you can see that every single student didn't actually complete their assignments. Do their degrees get stripped? What happens there? So these are consequences that we're starting to think of as hypotheticals of what could that be. So simultaneously, we're seeing more and more personalized artificial intelligence that's really tailored to you, and the potential for it to really take off and also really backtrack. So it's a cautious step forward, where yes, using it as a tool is important, but having the baseline skills are also going to be hyper important as we go forward.
I'm curious if either of you think that we should or can regulate it, because I think we're part of a global ecosystem now, right? Where the countries that don't are going to have an advantage and everyone else is trying to keep up. Is there anything that we can do or should do? Where do you sort of fall on that?
And I was going to say, we are seeing some variation on regulation in the EU, right? So even with the right to be forgotten and with all of their data privacy stuff, like they already have an established, like a set of regulations, maybe not specific to AI, but they do have established regulations. Whereas here we don't. I think there is still some responsibility on our government systems to have some sort of regulation, because otherwise, we're seeing a lot of instances where, we're having large AI systems pull information that they're not supposed to have access to. So a lot of articles have been pulled from different academic sites that are supposed to be behind certain walls. And I won't get into the ethics of putting academic articles behind paywalls, but if we're already taking all that information, like there has to be some degree. Otherwise, we start getting into copyright and lawsuits, and then it just gets messy.
Yeah, to add to that, I think to echo your point there, Megan, there's a bit of a risk between, regulation and innovation are a little bit at odds with each other. On one side, if you regulate too much, you stifle innovation. And say there's a country who decides to say no AI, we're not going to do it at all. While AI being such a powerful tool and such an empowering tool, you're kind of giving an advantage to all the other countries that don't do it. So yeah, I think it's a very fine line between too much regulation and then you're kind of falling behind the curve of the other countries that are allowing AI to do whatever it's going to do. I think the US is probably the most unregulated of the countries. EU tends to have a little bit more regulation. I'm not quite sure about China in terms of like their level of regulation, but we're all sort of competing here a little bit. So regulation is important, but I have found in the past that sometimes the regulators are not necessarily the ones who deeply understand the technology from which they are regulating. So they're they can go a little overboard, and we could really stifle our economy, or we could really stifle technology and innovation for our country if we do too much. But you're right. It's, some regulations are good. We have it in many other industries, and it keeps us from getting ourselves into too much trouble. So I think that's going to be a very tricky future for us to figure out what the right mix of that is. So
Yeah, I think you both kind of hit the nail. I think you both kind of hit the nail on the head too. Is it's such a complex challenge that it's going to really require a nuanced, collaborative approach across people who are knowledgeable across the sector, but also from other sectors that need to feed into that. And sadly, often what we see with regulation is they're not big on nuance. They're kind of big on blanket policies, which then puts us in places where there's all kinds of challenges too. So no, I think that's spot on.
Lauren, you alluded to some of the complexities that you're going to see for sure in post-secondary and in education. I'm curious if you were sort of designing education from scratch with the AI-driven world that we're going into. What would you sort of build into the curriculum that we're not teaching today?
Phenomenal question, mostly because I was 2 minutes late to this because I was finishing class prep for tomorrow for my first year university students who the course is Information Design, Past, Present, Future. You can see where artificial intelligence might be playing a little bit of a role in this. And part of this course is to try and teach theory to children, and not children, but like first year university students. These are people who are fresh out of high school and who've only known high school with ChatGPT. So they're really coming through this interesting space. And I recently redeveloped this course to try and take a look really at how we can work with and not just against artificial intelligence, while still hoping that I can convince students to do the readings. We'll see if that's ever going to work. Prior to the job that I'm currently in, I was the academic chair for data analytics and artificial intelligence at SAIT. My job there was to create a program to help train students so that they can get jobs doing integrated AI, so working with artificial intelligence at various companies once they graduate. And I think that the term that we coined, or the name that we coined the program, like integrated artificial intelligence, really gets at where I think the future is going for AI within education. Right now, a lot of universities are having blanket policies around no AI in the classroom. Absolutely not. If you use AI in your assignment, you immediately fail. It's an academic misconduct. We will... No, 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 no. But on the other side of things, we have profs who are immediately going, actually, I want to try and use this as a part of this. And so, because I know my students are going to go out into industry, they're going to use AI in any job that they have. How do we leverage this? How do we teach them what's right, what's wrong? And I think I fall kind of in the middle here. We do want students to still have the skills so that if AI goes away, they can still be employable. Now, I'm not suggesting AI is going to go away, but on the off chance that they don't have access to it, or their company is very anti-AI, we still want them to be able to do the communication tool and the design that they need to aside from it. But showing them what tools exist, showing them where they can be used, having really deep discussions around the ethics of using them, and letting students actually form their own opinions and develop their own brains and their own minds and their own direction has been a really big part of it. Because at the end of the day, it's up to them whether or not they actually use artificial intelligence. It's up to them whether or not education will be shaped by AI for them. And leaving it up to them at least gives them the agency to make that choice.
I can't speak to the educational field as well as Lauren. I'll defer to her there, but there's commonalities here, both in the employment space and I think in the education space, and that is like these tools and these AIs, if we leverage them, they can make us seem a lot more competent than we are, right? And you see that in grading. People can write papers, I'm sure, in the educational field, and they read amazing. It's almost as if that student has read everything there is to read about that subject to create that article. But we see this problem in the employment space as well. I've hired a number of people in the technical for technical roles, and technical role people tend to be on the forefront of using these technologies. And it's hard to know now, even when you're talking to somebody live in an interview, if they are using some kind of assistance there on all the questions you're asking. So it's getting harder and harder to evaluate people's competencies from both an educational perspective and even from an employing perspective. But I think the big risk, and Lauren, you alluded to it there, is we still need people to have critical thinking skills. And I think if you leverage AI to solve your problems, that's great. I remember when I was in school, we couldn't use calculators because they wanted us to learn like the base way of thinking around math. And then, the risk was if you just rely on your calculator, you actually don't know what you're doing. You're blindly hammering things in. And I think there's a greater risk now that we have these AI models, that there's kind of this rise of a new type of incompetency almost in individuals, where it's like, I'll just use the AI to answer all the problems and do all the critical thinking for me, and then I'll just copy and paste that in. And in the workplace, we see it all the time, people pasting emails where clearly they just put that email together with ChatGPT. So it's an amazing tool for people who do have critical thinking skills to leverage and become even more competent than they were. But unfortunately, it seems like it's an amazing magnifier of incompetency as well. So I think that's going to be something very interesting that we're going to have to deal with in both education and in the job place and assessing talent as well.
Yeah, and I've always referred to AI like, because like sometimes we talk about it as being like a mirror that reflects, us in society. I think of AI more as a magnifying glass, and whatever you put in front of it, it is gonna blow up. So if you are giving it incredible swaths of data and critical like thought, and you're really like putting all of that in, you're gonna get something great out of it. But if you're giving it garbage, you're gonna get a dumpster fire. And quite often, like what we see when people are using AI to do all of their writing, yeah, it might have access to all that information, but it doesn't know what information to look for unless you're telling it. And oftentimes we end up just getting these essays that just say nothing. It's like, wow, that is 10,000 words of not a single thing. And it's all written with this same voice, this same corporate tone speak. And I'm like, show me some of your personality. Give me some sort of voice. Like, when you read different authors and different textbooks, or even in different like fiction and fantasy, they all have this distinct voice, this narration. You can hear them. And oftentimes when you're reading something written by ChatGPT, you're like, wow, fall asleep listening to this. Like, I could fall asleep reading this article, or I could fall asleep reading this assignment. So I always encourage my students, like, be interesting, have an error. You're allowed to have errors. People have errors. To err is human. But without, and if we don't have any, and it's all just that corporate, like that perfectly polished, no one's going to read the whole thing, and your point might actually get lost.
I have an aunt and an uncle that are both University of Waterloo professors, and my aunt is adamant that she can tell any essay that comes in that's written by ChatGPT. I'm curious, just Lauren, scale of 0 to 10, how confident would you be that you could pick it out?
So like I had my students write critical reflection. So like essentially they read an article, they ask a question. I can tell you which questions were written by ChatGPT and which ones were written by my students. Like almost every single time. And that's not just because I've met my students. I've only known these students for 2 classes. I have seen them for a maximum of 2 hours. I can tell you which one of them, like what they wrote and what they didn't. It's like, no, I'm sorry, but no student is using the language of ChatGPT when they're 18 years old. It's just not happening. That like, and why so many M dashes? Why are certain
I know
things
the M
bolded?
dashes.
What is this
I
for?
coach Troy on removing those.
They will get you every single time. But what I think I hear you both saying is like there is this incredible amount of knowledge out there, this incredible amount of data, I guess we won't call it knowledge, I mean data out there that can be accessed. And yet there is still something that is inherently human about the way we communicate when we write or when we interact, where we do bring a piece of ourselves with us. Like I love what you said, Lauren. Like, I'm a total nerd. I love to write, I love to read. Why do I love certain authors more than others? It's because they have a voice behind the words that I'm reading that somehow speaks deeply to something, I'll call it my soul inside of me, and draws me into the story to interact with them and to be moved. And sometimes it does seem that that's kind of lacking when something is just certainly just generated by AI. And I know sometimes my concern is I don't want us to lose that in the workspace, even, Mike, like you talked about, right, where you can have these people who have access to all of this information, and yet when it comes to how they interrelate maybe with their coworkers and the way that they communicate, if it's always just copied and pasted, then we actually never really get a sense of who the individual is and what they bring to the table. What's their what's their fit on the team? Where's the chemistry that I think is so important to teams working well together and being productive? I think that gets somewhere lost in the translation. I just want to circle back to Mike for a second, if I could, because you just mentioned, that you're seeing more and more people using it, even in the interview process as you're looking to kind of place people in roles. So like, how do you combat that? How do you know what you're actually getting, I guess, right? If it's becoming harder and harder to tell who someone is. I guess I'm just kind of curious to know, like, how do you work with that to actually get to the bottom of like, where's the real person behind some of the words that they're sharing?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at this because this is a problem that we're just starting to see, like within the last maybe year or two, where now we're in interviews with people and we're not sure if we're actually talking to the person we're interviewing, which is a weird place to be in, right? So I think, though, my approach to it at least is around the questions you ask. So I think if you're asking questions that are factual or, tell me specifically about this brand of something or this, like ChatGPT is very good at looking that stuff up. And so let's say they are using those tools, they'll leverage those and they'll get those. But if you're asking skills kind of more around insights from experience, like almost questions that ChatGPT wouldn't really be able to generate. Let's say somebody's got 10 years of experience in the field, and you start asking them about, what are some of the biggest problems that you saw in the field in the last 10 years, and like, tell me a little bit about that, and what did you learn from it? Like, some of these questions get very difficult for ChatGPT assistants to answer because you're sort of asking, and it kind of gets to what we were talking about here. It gets to asking questions about them as a person and around their imperfections and around all of the great things that make us human and the journey that we've been on to get us to where we are in life. So I think, at least what I've tried and been fairly successful with is sort of framing the questions around getting to know the human there a little bit instead of in technical roles, you can get interviews that are very tell me, answer this. It's almost like an exam more so than like a getting to know the person. And so I think with AI now, we have this tool that maybe it's not so important anymore if candidates for certain roles have an amazing memory and have memorized like all the terms in a textbook. And so maybe what we need to look for now that we have access to that tool, they can lean on that. We're actually looking for people with grit. Can they get along with people? What are their personality? What are all those great things that make a human and fun to work with and effective and all of that stuff? So I think the interviewing process is going to have to lean a little bit more in that direction now if they haven't been already. So
I'm curious how you reconcile that with, I mean, you build some AIs that help with hiring, right? So how are you sort of reconciling the need to participate as a human and look for these human elements while leveraging AI to do that?
yeah, I guess that is a great contradiction, isn't it? Well, I guess we're looking for trying to extract out those human elements through behavioral cues and stuff like that. So, you know, it is more about what we're trying to do in that startup is, the traits and the frameworks from which we can extract out from somebody different parts of their personality. We're trying to use AI to look into those. And we don't think of it as an evaluation process. It's not like, oh, if you're a 10 on the extroversion scale, then you're way better than if you were a 0 on the extroverted scale and you're introverted. No, it's more about assessing, humans have very distinct fingerprints that make them very useful in certain situations, and they thrive in some, and one personality would thrive in one situation and it may not thrive in another situation. So, mostly the work there is around figuring out how good are you in some of those elements? How strong of a people person are you versus, how much do you think more about systems? And it's not saying that one is better than the other, but it's just sort of assessing like, okay, this is the makeup that makes you you. And then what we're trying to do is when you assemble teams or you place people into certain roles, well, we want to make sure that those personality styles or those things jive really well with each other. If you put a whole bunch of extroverted people in a role that, well, I'll use the opposite example. Say you have a sales role or a role that's like requires a lot of talking to people, a lot of socialization, that sort of stuff, and you decide to hire a team of introverted people that don't want to talk to each other and they don't really get energy from talking to people, well, you probably won't be successful there. So I guess to answer your question, Megan, AI can be very useful at assessing out some of those traits, or that's what we think. But yeah, it's I don't think AI is great at saying this is the person for the job, though. Like I'm not sure if we're at that spot quite yet, but maybe it could be leveraged to tell you a little bit more about the human aspect of an individual, that sort of thing.
Just to follow up on that question, so because I know, Mike, you do kind of work in this space with AI. I'm curious, like, because we've talked about how AI tends to have its own bias to kind of pleasing the individual that is interacting with it. So as you're building this AI to kind of help with evaluation, like how do you kind of make sure there's no hidden bias? It kind of starts to creep in to the, I guess we'll call it the machine as it's interacting with the individual.
Yeah, there's a lot of tricks to doing that, and it kind of comes around with the data sets that you are using and sort of the academic rigor that we have. So there's a whole branch of psychology, IO psychology. They specialize in this sort of assessment and doing these sort of things. And so in the academic realm, they've been, bias has been a problem well even before AI. This is a field of study before leveraging AI models. So if you look back, there's number of organizations and such that have for decades been trying to kind of apply mathematical or statistical models to assessing whether people are competent. But you're right, you can't. You got to be very careful for biasness and the data that you're using. And if you kind of train your ML models or your statistical models there on highly biased data, you're going to see a lot of biasness then within your hiring. And so I think the way you combat that is you just try to be vigilant on assessing that bias and really trying to be careful with how you're training these things and testing them and watching them, because that stuff it's easy to creep in. You're 100% right. Yeah.
I was just gonna add there, and like we are all biased, even now, right? There is not a single creature, like not a single person on this planet that is not biased in some way, shape, or form. I'm more biased towards coffee than tea, and that's obviously not what we're entirely talking about when it comes to hiring. Um, that bias is a part of being human, and those biases creep their way into machines, and not just in hidden ways. So yes, absolutely, this is a situation where I'm seconding what Mike said about like the data that you use is vitally important. The data set is massively important. If you're trying to figure out who's going to be the best person to hire for your company that is going to fit there, and you take all the resumes of the successful people at your company and you plug them into an AI and you say, find me another person like this, and you have 4 men named John who work at your company, it is more likely to pick out someone whose name is John. And almost all of these systems, almost all of these data sets, almost all of these things, like keep in mind, no matter what data set we use, unless we are counterbalancing it, we are going to privilege the people we've always privileged, right? We're always going to be approaching that from that white, Western, settler colonial, like very patriarchal dominant perspective. So you're going to see women, and in particular Black women or Indigenous women, be disenfranchised often, like over and over and over again, unless those data sets are counterbalanced to show that yes, these folks still like should be considered and should be valued, even though they historically haven't been. So when we're using historical data sets in particular, unless we want to keep things going the way they've been going, which can like maybe that's the direction your company wants to go. But if you want more diversity in your company, you have to add diversity to the data set, right? So that's just one thing that just massively to flag, because it's garbage in, garbage out, except with AI, garbage in, dumpster fire out.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit there, Lauren. Like it is a large problem, especially in this space, because some of the historical data sets were biased. If you go and look at, I want to take on all of the data of the CEOs in North America over the last 50 to 100 years. I mean, clearly you're going to see some bias within there because there was certain groups of people and privileges and stuff in there that just happened to be CEOs. So if you're blindingly taking that data, well, those cultural biases and all of that is there. And the problem is, well, where do you get the other data from then? Because like the only data that we have historically is kind of this biased data. So it becomes a bit of a challenge of like, okay, well, we don't want data sets like that. How do we augment our data sets or sort of, deal with the fact that we have these inherited biases just baked into our data sets that we're training these things on?
Yeah, because like women didn't have access to credit cards until the late 70s. So if we're taking, you know what I mean, like so like we were certainly not in the CEO space as equal representation, and that's just white women, right? Like not even considering every other like aspect of there. So like just from that diversity and inclusion perspective, like y'all, our data sets suck, right? And it makes that so much harder. So maybe it becomes, hey, we do the hiring and we actually are doing all of these assessments for the quality of people's work and not for whatever their traits might be. We build up enough people there and that becomes the data set. So there's a lot of baseline work that needs to happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's the approach that we're taking as well. Like if you assess people for their competency, like don't take historical bias data. Look at somebody in terms of their competencies and who they are and what they're able to do and try to even, remove some of those biasness attributes out of it. And we'll look at people for who they are, regardless of any of these other, sort of gender, ethnic background, all of that stuff, like let's not bias against any of that stuff. I think that is the approach. Unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of that data now, so we need to build that. That's a big responsibility for kind of modern society here to ensure that we have that. We're building those data sets and we're taking those approaches. Yeah.
No, exactly, and making sure that like we're looking at people's potential, recognizing that not everyone had access to the same spaces in education, which is becoming obnoxiously expensive. But that's a whole other side tangent I could talk about for ages about just the cost of tuition. And certain people having better access to different education, better access to different resources, so they were able to get those different vocational standards. So it just becomes a matter of like how do we uplift our communities so that we can get to the stage where we have this. So yeah, absolutely, Mike.
I just want to second that whole thing about education because my daughter's a freshman this year and we just delivered her to the East Coast to a school and oh my gosh. Anyways, because it's not even just like the tuition anymore. It's just the whole experience. Anyways, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole either. I also was just kind of curious about what you, or I would just add, I guess, that I think that's why this hybrid is so important. I just don't think we want to remove humans from the context of, say, let's say the hiring environment in particular, right? Like I appreciate what AI can do. And I actually am hoping to leverage more of that in our company too, to try to understand how we can use that well to assess someone's competencies. But at the same time, the importance of actually still having that relational connection in the hiring process where actual people get together and have conversations beyond, like you said, Mike, just like the, standard answer this, answer that, but actually conversations around, I want to get to know you as a human being. I want to understand how you relate. I want to understand how you fit with the culture and the chemistry of this organization and what you bring to the table that is unique. And being willing to look at people who might be outliers from the data set, but who actually bring so much diversity and experience into the space that might be different from what has kind of always been. And so I think that is a challenge that we have to kind of try to navigate as we balance out the benefits and what AI can do, but also how do we then continue to keep that relational space warm, welcoming, and really, I think, effective for building strong teams.
I feel for you, Mike, because you're so optimistic in this space, and it's just a lot of people asking you questions about their fears and anxieties all the time. Kind of on that note, to both of you, a lot of people are anxious about AI. So, what would you say to somebody that's feeling like it's moving too fast, who's fearful about technology? Are there any words of comfort that you could sort of provide?
I'd love to hear what Mike has to say on this one because I'm definitely one of the people who would love to hear some comfort here.
Yeah, I would say I'm more bearish on this. I think we're a long ways away from the robot overlords, I don't know, enslaving us all. Hollywood does not help with the whole image of the evil AI overlords. Also, we're in a hype cycle, and so, people like OpenAI and, Sam Altman over there, they have a very vested interest in convincing you that their companies will be creating, the robot overlords and all of that because they're in the business of raising money and they're in the business of keeping their shareholders optimistic about them being a very expensive and worthy company to invest in. I mean, you could echo this with Elon Musk and his robots and all of this stuff, but you know, technology doesn't necessarily go the way that we want. I remember Elon Musk was saying we'll have self-driving cars, and I forget how many years ago this was. This might have been 6 years, 7 years ago. Said in the next 2 years we'll have cracked the self-driving car problem, and we'll all be having. We're so far away from that. And Andre Karpathy is one of my kind of nerd heroes. He was one of the early ML guys in Tesla. He's the same thing. He worked on that problem, and he is one of the leaders in computer vision space. And he even thinks like the people in the field, they know that we're a long ways away from this. And I think where some of this fear comes is we've definitely had a really big innovation in the AI space, and it's launched us forward quite a bit. And people see that velocity and they say, well, if we keep going up at this velocity and things keep growing at the speed of which we were growing, we're going to be, this is terrible for humanity. The robot overlords are a couple of years away, but technology doesn't really work that way. What tends to happen is we see really big innovations in the space, but we could be another 100 years away from the next innovation that gets us closer to artificial, like general intelligence or the type of intelligence even capable of doing some of the terrible things we're thinking about. Like if you look at human flight, I think the Wright brothers were early 1900s was our first flight, and then we get to propeller planes, and then we get to jet engines, and then we land on the moon on a rocket ship. And so if you were looking at that kind of velocity of technology, you might think, oh, we'll have warp engines in no time. Like look at how fast this stuff is moving. And we're a long ways away from warp engines. So I think some of this fear is coming around. Like we're in a state where there has been a lot of growth, and definitely AI has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. But it's not guaranteed that this velocity will continue. It's very possible that we've seen a big growth cycle, and it's an amazing tool. And yeah, it's going to be remarkably useful. But it's very possible that we've sort of reached to the max of where we could reach, kind of with the current algorithms and technologies, and could be decades and decades away from the next innovation that gets us to the robot overlords stage where all of this fear is.
And I can absolutely also speak to the robot overlord side of things. As much as we've had these massive software leaps, like Mike was saying, the physical side of things, like the actual physical robot, humanoid robot side of things, is, I can't stress this enough, nowhere near as bad as we think it could be. So we're definitely fine on that road. Artificial intelligence anytime soon. Watch me be that one person who wrote the article about, oh, we can never expect flight. We're 100 years away from flight. And then the Wright brothers the next day actually take off. Like, watch me be that person. We have general AI tomorrow. but like that, and it would happen to me, honestly. But no, and I also want to stress, like, for as much as people might be terrified of things like dead internet theory, which, like, yeah, fair.
Do you want to explain that a little bit to people that aren't aware?
Yeah, I will dive into it, but before I do, I just want to stress, like, ChatGPT still gets things wrong. It has access to every little bit of data that it's been fed, ethically or unethically, and it still gets things wrong. And if you doubt that, pick your favorite niche hyper-obsession, the one thing you care so much about and you know. Ask it a question, like, that requires nuance. It will not hit the nuance that you have. Expertise is not dead, and just because an AI can get a general gist of something doesn't mean it actually understands what it's talking about. It doesn't understand the nuance that comes along with human embedded emotion and knowledge. So I would not stress over that taking over completely. I mean, I would worry more about something like, say, dead internet theory. Dead internet theory being the concept that online there will be more bots than people, and it will be mostly bots and not people interacting with each other. So when you go on any of your social media platforms, how many of the things that you're seeing people do commentary and back and forth on, how many of those are actually people, and how many are just internet or bot generated things? How many articles are you actually reading, like news articles that are actual articles, and how many are just auto generated? How many images are you seeing that are real, and how many images are you seeing that are generated by machines? Those numbers went from only human to not looking so good, looking a lot more like machines real quick. And that's something, especially on scalability, that I would show some concern over, or at least look into, just from the perspective of, if ChatGPT or if any of your AIs are looking at the internet as a data set, and that data set is all just generated from other machine generated data sets, and you can see how this is starting to become, like turtles all the way down, right? How is it going to come up with real generative information that is going to be true to the human experience if it is only learned from machines? So the one thing I would suggest, especially for folks who are experiencing this AI anxiety, who are experiencing tech anxiety in general, who are afraid that their data has been compromised and who are having all of these moments, have some time away from the internet. Put your phone down, turn it off, go sit in a park, watch some people and their dogs and the bees and all the mosquitoes that Calgary has had for the past, summer. Go experience human connection on a tangible, physical, outside of internet level. It's wonderful that we're able to stay connected like this. It's wonderful that we're able to reach out and actually connect with each other over the internet. But that connectedness and that human aspect is massive for improving our health and well-being. One of the areas that I study is loneliness, and by combating some of these things through human connection, we actually can make it easier to engage with technology in a way that's healthy for us, and in a way that'll give us hope still for the future. So that when we are going to talk about AI and when we're approaching these, we're not approaching it from a place of fear, but we're approaching it from a place of, okay, what can this tool do? How can I either use this tool, or if I don't want to use this tool, how do I avoid this tool? And it allows you to go at it with a slightly clearer head.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful segue into another question we had, which was, what is a healthy way for organizations and individuals to approach AI and engage with it without too much panic, but without too much complacency? And it sounds like that's very up your alley.
I mean, if we're taking it from my own personal perspective, artificial intelligence is, because of all of the data that it's using and the data centers that it's using and the water consumption and the sustainability issues, ideally, and again, this is coming from someone whose entire job is centered around this emerging technology, ideally it goes away. And we work towards a healthier planet. And we work towards a place where we can all actually work together in a way that still values that human connection and doesn't involve me asking a machine to ask you to ask a machine to do something. That would be the ideal. That is not what is going to happen. AI is here. It is here likely to stay. So within that context, the best thing that we can do is approach everything with a human first, user-centered, and human-centered, which are slightly different things, mindset, at least from my perspective, right? Keeping it, and keeping in mind that user-centered versus human-centered is the user, if it's a user-centered, is the person who's going to be interacting with whatever technology is that we're using. Human-centered is, how do we actually keep people as a whole at the center of this design? So we're not just saying this is the one specific thing for the person who's going to be using it, but we're looking at not just the person using it, but the people they interact with and they interact with and they interact with.
Yeah, I always find these conversations are kind of interesting because for me, machine learning has been around for a long time, before we've had these conversations. And to me, it's a bunch of math and statistical tools that are very good at predicting words in a sequence. And so it's kind of funny that we're having these conversations now that's like, It's math that is giving people anxiety and making them nervous. So, even the atomic bomb is technically just math, right? And that kind of stuff caused a lot of anxiety, I'm sure, when that was invented. Um, yeah, I don't know. I find like AI is such a powerful, I don't think it's going to go away for sure because it's such a powerful tool. It is almost akin to the invention of electricity and how much that was transformative for, humanity when electricity was invented. And there's a lot of parallels that people are making to AI and electricity in that like it is this service and this lifeblood now that is like expanding out across society. So I think with every technology, there's a lot of fear. I'm sure when electricity was invented, there was probably a lot of fear around what that means to industries, how it'll disrupt things, and all of that sort of thing, and how it's going to use. But it's also an incredibly powerful tool. AI can empower people, and like what Lauren said, is a magnifying glass on top of what you can do. But how you should interact with it, I guess to answer your question more directly there, Megan, was, you know, you can see AI right now as this very obedient, super intelligent professor almost. And, you should interact with it and learn with it and use it to grow as a person and not have it write your papers for you or your emails for you. Or like the way you should interact with this is, this it will write your papers for you if you ask it. It's more than happy to do what you're asking it to do. But I would say the way you should use it and the way you should leverage it is that it's a big modality shift now for humanity in that we can now converse with all of human knowledge. And I think that's the biggest value that AI brought. So before, like the dawn of the internet was now we brought all of the knowledge into this network that spans the whole globe. That was a huge shift for things. And then you got companies like Google capitalizing on that in like, how do we search through that and find that knowledge? And so Google is a very successful company off of the back of that, that in their ad systems. But so like that was a big shift that we have all of this human knowledge out there now. It's accessible to everybody, and we can query it. We can like look for articles, and we can do stuff. And now AI brings the next leap forward, which is you can have a conversation with all of the world's knowledge, and you now have access to conversing with it. And so definitely for me, and I'm sure there's a lot of people like me, I learn a lot more rapidly when I can speak about complicated subjects to something and I can have a back and forth interaction with that knowledge. That's why, if we all had unlimited money and we all had a personal tutor with us, we'd probably do very well in school. And now we can kind of have that. Now AI will be a tool that'll let us do that. And it'll let us comb through vast amounts of knowledge and summarize it and do it. So I think if you use it as a tool for that, it's very powerful. But if you're just going to use it for a tool to think your thinks for you, yeah, I would caution against doing that because it's from earlier conversation, it's very obvious to people that you may be doing that, and I don't think it's helping you as much as you think it is. So, yeah.
And just to jump on the one last thing there, like, and it does have access to a lot of knowledge, a lot, absolutely, but it doesn't have access to everything, right? It doesn't have access to indigenous stories that are passed down through oral tradition. It doesn't have access to things that are not within standard Latin-based languages that are written in specific ways. It doesn't have access to things that are behind very distinct paywalls. It has access to the open internet. And I want to keep in mind for folks, would you trust the internet to answer your question always correctly? So, and this is my only big pushback there is, do you trust Wikipedia and the guy on Reddit? Well, you know that Wikipedia is crowdsourced and you know that people can edit that. Who edited or who decided what counted or what could be accessible from that query for OpenAI? Do you know who it was? No? Then maybe we question the answer we get. So still use AI, I get it. You're still like, we can still get answers from these different pieces of AI, even like we can still get answers from Google, but pause before you use it and say, okay, does this actually jive with the stuff that I've already seen? Do I know that this actually counts and actually works? Because sometimes it'll make it up. It'll just kind of hallucinate and make up its own answer. And hallucinations are getting less, yes, but they're still there. So there's not always going to, and it's not a person. It doesn't have that real personal connection. So there's just that my little sprinkle of caution, my little professor hat comes on and goes, no, 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 no. Very briefly, just to be like, yes, I understand it's going to get used, but recognize that it's not, it doesn't know everything. And what it does know, it can't know no nuance on in the same human way.
Yeah, I think that's very true, Lauren. And to add on that even a little bit, you're right. It's all of the written, open knowledge, we'll say, or whatever that body of knowledge is. And maybe this will change, and this will be a big innovation in the next couple of years. But there are problems out there from which what is written about it is only a small fraction of what you need to solve the problem. And so, a big active push, I'm sure, for some of these companies in the future is how do we ingest all of the video data? Like, we're not ingesting. YouTube has an insane amount of data there on video and audio and all that. These models aren't trained, and the architecture is not in such a way that you could transcribe, I'm sure, the conversations in YouTube and use that as training data. But there's a lot of things in nuances, in body language, in all of this stuff that these models, I don't even know if we know how to incorporate that into the training right now.
Yeah. And like, do we have the copyright to be able to do it, right? Like, are we actually, did these people consent to giving up their data? And just because something's written on the internet doesn't make it true, right? Like, there's a lot of blogs out there that have wild conspiracy theories that are still included in the training set, right? This is one of those, like, I don't know if any of y'all drive through Calgary very often. Do you trust every driver you meet on Deerfoot? Okay. Do you trust everyone you read about on the internet?
For sure. We see this exact same problem in engineering. So, all these coding agents that will code for you are trained off of the internet's data. Yeah, 80% of the coding data on there could have been written by people that are, new to the field, don't really know what they're doing necessarily. It's kind of dirty, it's kind of junky. And, the amount of super clean, really well written code data is probably behind walls that thing couldn't be trained on, because some of that really, really good stuff is all private and proprietary. So that's not part of the training data. So if you take a look at that field specifically, and this is a problem that I see in the day-to-day, the automatic coding stuff was trained on not necessarily great data, because the really good stuff is pretty proprietary, or there's not as much of it as there is garbage. So yeah, that is a great caution, to echo kind of Lauren's concern there.
I know, Mike, we spoke like a year and a half ago about this. It was all sort of new to the layman, but not so new to you. And you said that it's not AI coming to take your jobs. It's people who use AI coming to take your job. So we've talked a little bit about like the cautions of implementing AI, but what are some things that employees really should be leveraging or should be doing to sort of keep up and maybe hang on to their jobs or excel in their careers?
Yeah, like from what I've seen, and I'd still stand by that statement that I made a year and a half ago when I made it there, Megan, that these tools will enhance you, and they will not take over your job, but people that embrace and are leveraging these tools and becoming more efficient because they're effectively leveraging these tools, they have an advantage on you. We've seen this with technology before, though. Like, imagine you were an accountant and you didn't want to embrace computers and you just wanted to do all of your accounting work by hand. You will be overtaken by someone that leverages technology. Like, if you see, again, use that magnifying glass analogy, and I think even Steve Jobs said something about, this technology is like the bicycle or something like that in terms of what it can do for efficiency. And you could run really, really fast, but if somebody is using leveraging technology and they're in a Ferrari, you're not going to keep up with them. And it doesn't matter how talented and a good runner you are and all of that. They're just able to use these technologies to sort of magnify their abilities by a number of folds. And unfortunately, at least in a capitalistic industry, if somebody can output 2 times the output for the same price as somebody who doesn't, that's not good for the person who can't. So I think, it just, the one advice I would give is more than ever now, you need to be continually learning, embracing new technologies. That may not have been the case, say, 100 years ago, or previously in humanity's history, where you could get really good at something and then you could just focus down on that one thing that you get good at. I don't know if that's necessarily true in the modern world. I think we're in a state of change, and new technologies are popping up very rapidly. And if you want to stay successful, you at least have to be aware of them, or know how to use them, or know how to not use them, and be a continual learner. Because the person that will take your job will be that person. I think, it's not the AI. It's people that know how to leverage it. So that'd be my only caution.
I would add, again, not as someone who hires, but as someone who doesn't necessarily hire in the same way and is not in the same necessary field. And I hate the term soft skills. I really do, because I don't think that they're soft in any way, shape, or form. Developing your ability to communicate with other people and show empathy and care and your human side, the things that the technology cannot do, that's going to become such a massive skill and game changer. Because at the end of the day, when a company is looking to hire you, or you're looking to go to a place, the interview is both ways, and we're looking for fit. Are you going to be someone, especially in nonprofits and especially in small teams, are you going to be someone that this group of people wants to spend 8 hours a day with? Because if AI can do most of the simple parts of your job, and you're going to be leveraging it during that time, are you going to be someone that is that is a joy to be around, to put it nicely, right? So working on how you communicate with others, being effective in that communication, showing empathy and care for your colleagues, those are all parts that will end up mattering potentially more than your ability to write a prompt.
Mm-hmm. I heard it's more of an era for the generalist, 1,000 different things for about 10 minutes each, and just gets good enough at them. To not have to really hunker down and specialize and choose, and just to be able to constantly be learning. It's very satisfying for the ADHD brain that resides in my head. So if we're talking a little bit about quelling anxiety, maybe that also helps a couple other people sort of in my position. But yeah, I'm a little bit excited, still apprehensive.
I was just going to say, like, specifically, I'm curious to know for lots of people I talk to. So I'm in kind of the second half of my career, some would say in the last third. I'm coming to this space where I talk to lots of people my age who do feel that kind of anxiety, and it's maybe not so much about like that the overlords are taking over, but that, like, your students, Lauren, like I love the way that you shape that around, like, as students who are now kind of steeped in AI from a very young age, let's not forget those powerful skills of empathy and relationship and care. For those of us who are further along, who are like, and this is, I guess the question is, I don't always know what to tell people who say to me, okay, like, as someone who's in their 50s and I want to stay relevant, like, where do I start? Like, what would be a practical space, some practical things that we could offer to folks who are like, I want to stay relevant, but, like, honestly, I'm playing catch up in a huge way. Like, where do I start? Where do I begin? What would be some real practical places they could start leveraging AI in a way that would help them kind of keep pace?
Before anyone starts, you got where you are based on the skills you already have. You have done an incredible job of building whatever career or field it might be. You already have the expertise that folks who are going to be just starting out and using AI, but the folks that are just going to be starting out, they're going to be using AI to access some of that expertise. So already you're farther ahead of the game than you think. And yes, AI is coming in, and yes, it's going to be something that gets leveraged, but you already have all the knowledge that you needed to get to where you are. So don't panic. You're not going away. That would be the initial calming. Then I would point them towards different courses that they can find on Code Academy or on free online learning platforms. There's fantastic different places on YouTube where you can start to learn about what AI is, because that's got to be your starting spot. A lot of people are coming into this going, what is artificial intelligence? And if you asked all four of us here today, we were all going to have different answers, mostly. I think Mike and I are pretty aligned on the fact that it's just data that people are accessing, right? But As a general population, understanding what AI is your first step. And once you have an idea of what this thing is that's being introduced, and you recognize that it's not gonna remove the amount of expertise that you've already built, then you can start getting into, well, what parts of it do I actually want to learn? But just get that baseline definition in there first, and don't worry, you've already got this. You made it this far.
Would agree with, definitely on the soft skill side, using ChatGPT, it'll give you an excellent workout plan, but it can't motivate you to go and work out like the skills that motivate people to do things. I'm not even sure we're anywhere near getting these things to do that properly. And you could see that firsthand. Go and try to get ChatGPT to get you to work out more and motivate you to do things. And and another thing that I'm seeing, and we may take this for granted, ChatGPT and these other LLMs, constructive feedback and a little bit of pushback and contradiction and stuff, they don't do that stuff very well. And so, one part of being a great leader and some of these soft skills and some of that is delivering hard conversations, knowing how to navigate sort of these things that happen. We People with a lot of life experience, like the only way to learn that is to experience a lot of them. So there's all of these skills that people have that are nowhere. The LLMs will, I think, struggle with having difficult conversations with people in tactful ways for a very long time because I don't think they have any idea how to do that. So, and then I guess on the front of how do you get started or how do you learn with this stuff, I guess just first off, adopting a mentality that this technology isn't going anywhere. And I've sort of seen this, maybe even with my own parents a little bit, is every now and then some people just get off the train and they say, this technology stuff, it's not for me, and then they stop even looking at it. So I think the first step is, stay on the train. It's not as scary as you think, and you don't have to be an expert at this stuff. You can have a general understanding of how this stuff works, and you can leverage it, and it can be very useful for you. You don't have to be an expert. It's not like you're going to have to go back to school for 4 years to understand how to interact with ChatGPT effectively. And the other good thing is the private companies creating these pieces of software and all of these platforms have a vested interest in making it easy to use and easy to get started with. They don't want their tools and their AI tools to be hard to use and confusing and have a giant knowledge cliff in order to start leveraging them. So I think whether you like it or not, if AI is going to creep into your life and just kind of embrace it, use it a bit, get to know it. I know Microsoft, I've already seen them. They're putting into their email clients. I think Gemini is showing up in everyone's Gmail and stuff like that. So all of this stuff is coming. So I would say it's not as scary as you think. You don't have to be an expert. It's not going to take you months and months and months to understand how you can use this somewhat to make your life better or solve some problems for you. So just sort of embrace it and use it as it comes. I would say, yeah, don't kind of turn your back to it. That would be the biggest mistake.
Just in terms of skills that AI is never going to have, what would they be? And you've sort of touched on the soft skills, you've touched on critical feedback, that sort of a thing. Is there anything else that maybe we're leaving out?
Well, Lauren mentioned this a little bit. It's so funny. We always thought the knowledge workers were going to be safe for forever from automation. It was sort of like, oh, all the trade skills or the hands-on skills, machines will just all be doing that for us. And the knowledge workers, where that's the rise of the next job. But we're seeing a little bit of a shift in that ChatGPT can do some knowledge worker jobs actually really well, but some of this more hands-on stuff like ChatGPT is a very long ways away from building a house. That's probably not going to happen for a long time. So I think there's a number of jobs that maybe we thought would automate sooner that I think are still a long ways around that, and that's a lot of this hands-on stuff. Soft skills definitely one of it, but we can't seem to get these. I think, Lauren, you mentioned it earlier on. We can't seem to get these things to interact with the world very well. Like these robots are not very fluidly. Like Boston Dynamics, they release some videos every now and then where we hit them with hockey sticks and they get back up and stuff like that. And it's really funny to watch. But I think there's a whole bunch of technology problems around. I don't even know if we can provide enough power to those things to stay awake long enough to do complicated tasks with. And the whole world is designed for two-legged humans with hands to interact with it. That's how
Yeah.
everything is designed, and that's the interface of the world because, we're the ones that have built all of this stuff. Yeah, the AI is nowhere near interacting with that effectively. So if you have a job that does a lot of that stuff, it's a long ways before your job it will be automated.
Yeah. And I had a thought and then it got replaced with another one that like yeah, we're nowhere close. And anytime you see like a robot that's like talking back, like even like Sophia, the talking head, had a thing in Dubai ages ago. Yeah, that's the Wizard of Oz effect. There's a person, there's a man behind the mirror, man behind the curtain who's actually typing the answers and doing the controls behind the scenes. I mean, I immediately thought of the meme. I always thought technology would come to help me do my laundry so that I could go write poetry, and instead it's writing poetry and I'm stuck doing my laundry.
Mm-hmm.
So, ever so sadly, I think like technology is always going to come and do the things that are going to be efficient, and especially under like in a capitalist environment, it's going to be able to help make more money. What it's not necessarily going to do is foster that creativity. Like Mike said, it might make you a workout plan, but it's not going to motivate you to get up and go move your body. So when it comes to the human aspects of actually having the desire to go out and create and make and do things in the real world, that's the area where technology is not thriving. That's the area where you can. It might tell you how to do a garden, but it's not going to be able to tell you, hey, wait a minute, maybe this plant is not working the way I need it to. Maybe it, like the nuance of caring for another creature, thing, living being, like that, it does not have. So, those are the areas that we could really work towards ourselves.
Well, I know, Mike, you mentioned building houses, but I just saw this thing with they've 3D printed an entire neighborhood, right? So, like, maybe not AI, but there's still some technological advances coming in surprising ways, right? And medical, it seems like we're making huge advancements as well.
Yeah, I hope that stuff shows up. But like what Lauren said, I hate folding my laundry. So the minute that stuff, yeah, it'd be
Man.
great to see that. I mean, we'll see.
Fingers crossed some of the domestic labor can be taken over
Yeah,
by
seriously.
some variation on technology. Could you please cook me some variation on a delicious meal, do my laundry, clean up after the foster puppy that's currently peeing on my floor? If it could do that, that would be the real beauty of it.
Yeah, who is the bot from the Jetsons? Was that Rosie? Yeah,
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
We need a
those.
Don't
Rosie. Yeah.
don't we all want a Rosie? Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Before we digress, just because this seems like a good point to segue, tell me about your Hitchbot, Lauren.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the team right after Hitchbot's demise, so sadly. But Hitchbot was a wonderful research project that challenged, instead of having the question of can people trust robots, it asked can robots trust people? And so it was this little tiny robot. It was made of a bucket with pool noodle arms and Wellington boots and dish gloves for hands. And it was able to move its hand up and down like this, and it was able to talk. The actual Hitchbot itself was very low cost to build, but its technology and its ability to just respond was the cooler part of it. And Hitchbot essentially hitchhiked its way from the east to west coast across Canada, or I think it was east to west. And people loved it. It was a phenomenon, and it found out that in Canada, Hitchbot absolutely could trust people. And then Hitchbot tried to do the same thing in the U.S. and was left in a park in Philly overnight. And it's not always sunny in Philadelphia, so Hitchbot's head was mailed back to the researchers.
How did you leave an address on Hitchbot? How did
There's a
they?
whole thing at the end of there where we weren't sure if it was YouTubers who had done it or if it was someone else, and it's still widely not quite understood. But the moral of the story is Hitchbot is home now, and the second Hitchbot body, which went and did kind of like a vacation tour of the Netherlands, is currently sitting in a museum. So
Amazing. So it was really fame that did it in. I think perhaps if there
it really
wasn't this
was. I think
like
perhaps I was going to
notoriety.
say fame or Philly at midnight.
I was going to say the city of brotherly love did
Yep.
it in. Which is a misnomer if you ever watch a Philadelphia Eagles game. Kind of in light of everything we've talked about on the podcast, if our listeners could take away one step today, whether they're students, whether they're leaders, whether they're kind of like mid-career professionals like me, when it comes to kind of engaging with AI, like what should it be?
Maybe I'll add, kind of echoing my last point, is the ability for people to leverage these tools to learn and to grow. You need to be cautious about it, and there is some pitfalls for it, but in the past, knowledge used to be heavily gated, and unless you were, very rich and could go to the fanciest of schools and learn all of the great things, you weren't going to learn it. And now, what AI lets us do is it allows anyone, regardless of your kind of academic history or your background, you can now have a conversation, and you could learn particle physics if you really wanted to. You could leverage these tools, and you could ask dumb questions to it, all the way up to learning some of this stuff, and that's something that, I feel I'm very excited to be alive in a time where now, if you like learning new things and you like learning and growing and consuming knowledge, we're at the golden era of consuming knowledge and access to knowledge. And so, yeah, I think that fear and anxiety point, yeah, there's definitely some unknowns, and it's a scary time. There's also just a ton to be excited about, and there's just a ton of opportunities. And if people kind of see this more as this great tool that we can leverage to grow and learn and use, instead of something to be feared. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me.
I think for me, the biggest thing is everything we do with intention. Be curious and critical at the same time. How we think about artificial intelligence matters. How we communicate with and about artificial intelligence matters. How we represent it matters, because it shapes our public collective understanding of it. So right now, if you were to go on Google, search images for artificial intelligence, you're going to get all the same images of things that are blue and purple, lots of hands doing the Michael God creator, image, lots of robots, and that's not what AI is. So figure out what it is, and to your best understanding and knowledge, figure out where you stand and your comfort level with interacting with these technologies. Recognize that every interaction we have is not neutral. Yes, everything is going to have a bias, but every interaction you have with a person is biased as well. The garbage in, garbage out or garbage in, dumpster fire out is one I want to stress. And we are a part of a larger ecosystem. This is not just you interacting with a single thing alone in a room. This is impacted far larger, so try and adopt that systems thinking approach. Where is the information coming from? Can you trust it? And if you want to trust it, can you use it? And are you able to live with the consequences if it's wrong? So I will adopt the Debbie Downer side of it and be the slightly more pessimistic side with AI. But yeah, you have this tool, and what you do with it is up to you. In the same way that a pen can sign a birth certificate or a warrant for someone's arrest or an execution, artificial intelligence is what you make it.
All right. Well, Lauren and Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely having this conversation. I have it privately, I think, in pubs all the time, but getting to talk with experts about it is always another level that I really, really enjoy. And this has been fascinating and incredibly helpful. And if you want to talk to either of our lovely guests, what's the best way to get in touch or follow you?
I am pretty off of most social media, surprising no one, but you can find me on my website. It's laurenjdwyer.com, so LAUREN, letter J, DWYER.com.
I'm not a huge social media person, but I do have LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to reach out, love to have a conversation with anyone in the industry, or if they have any questions, feel free to reach out to me there.
Learned so much from you guys. Thank you so much. And for our listeners, I hope you're walking away encouraged that while AI is changing the landscape, vocation is still about people. It's about curiosity, adaptability, and stepping into what's next. This has been Vocation Mode, presented by Vocara Union. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to share it with a friend who's curious about the nature of work. Leave us a review and join us next time as we continue to explore the intersection of calling, leadership, and what's next for vocations.